And so one of the things we're also, just like Molly said, really working hard on is trying to help people understand all the facts associated with this. And like you said, have a candid conversation about it. So the fact that the Russians acted against the United States to try to influence the election, I think is pretty well established fact. There are, I think objective intelligence reports that say that. What I think really is important to try to understand, and Clint, you've been working on this for a long time too, is the Russian mindset and what they're going after. And so you, like Molly, you've been studying the Russians and a lot of other bad guys, not just them, in terms of what they're trying to accomplish. Talk us through that part. Like, ultimately, if it's the Russians, it could very well be the North Koreans next time. Why are they doing this? What's their ultimate interest?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, I'll give an example. The first Charlottesville nightmare protest that we saw, one of the first lines they chanted was, "Russia is our friend." Now, I grew up in Missouri, and we played war in the cornfields, and that's how I ended up in the Army. And we wanted to kill communists. I mean, Rocky IV was all about this, right? Imagine in 1981 now, a group of men showing up at a protest and chanting, "Russia is our friend." The second Charlottesville protest, there was a guy talking about, he had the Bashar al-Assad's bomb-making factory, barrel bomb factory, and was chanting about Syria, has it right, and those sorts of things. Russia's goal is two parts. One, it's a strategy of devolution, to break up unity of all unions wherever they're at. And that goes from a local level. I mean, I think you've seen the Cal exit, Texas exit, stuff that's come out just the past week, a lot more detailed analysis, but also in terms of two primary adversaries for the Russians, which is NATO and the European Union. If they can break up those, that allows them to go one-on-one with any country, and then they have strength diplomatically in terms of information, military, even economically with their gas and oil reserves. Beyond that, it's to push their agenda, their foreign policy view, and they have already won. It is over, folks. They have won. In 3 years, the greatest influence campaign in the history of mankind has just been pulled off. They now have influence over a nationalist, not globalist, a nationalist agenda that stretches from Russia through Germany, through France, through the United States. They have influence over audience segments that agree with them. They are anti-immigration. They are anti-refugee. They are pro-nationalism. They're anti-globalist. This is the themes that you saw, whether you're a Democrat or Republican. During the campaign, that was the targeted theme. Didn't matter if you were Marco Rubio on one side or Hillary Clinton on the other. The other thing that we really need to understand is it is anti-democracy through and through. We might have hated the Soviets whenever I was out in the cornfields running around playing war, but at least they believed in something. They had an ideology they believed in. What does the Russian regime believe in? It is a kleptocracy. It is against human rights. It is a country that is now controlling information. WikiLeaks, which is a proxy, essentially, of the Russian government that talks about transparency, it is promoting a country that has zero transparency. There's 100% internet surveillance probably by the end of the summer. VPN is the new, legislative agenda of Putin.
I got to know and see in real life action. And she really is one of the people who I would say are a handful who I most admire for everything she's done. And as I told you, when you're in charge of defending NSA's networks, that's like a pretty hard job. So we called Debbie up. We said, "Hey, Debbie, we have this, funny project. What do you think?" And she didn't even think twice. She's like, "I'm there, I'm on it, absolutely." And she's been working really hard ever since then. She's the lead for the playbook. Where you heard we're going to try to give some practical advice. She's working along with Dmitry Alperovich from CrowdStrike, another good, hardworking guy. But talk to us, Debbie, a little bit from your perspective about some of the things that campaign staffs could do to raise the bar on their security.
Next, I'd say the campaign really needs to think hard about what they need to protect. And what comes to mind are, donor lists or strategies and plans. And, Matt and Robbie can talk to what's most important much better than I can. But the things that need to be protected need to be protected in the appropriate way. So using the cloud for security and using virtual private networks as needed.
VPN is the new, legislative agenda of Putin. So I think what we need to understand is we are in an era that is national security in a world of audiences. It is not defined by the borders of our country. And we have lost that in the United States at this point. There are audience segments that don't believe in the system which we have in this country right now. They don't believe that elections are true. And they actually don't think everyone should have the right to vote. They also don't believe that we should have unity, and they're okay. If you look at just the public opinion polling, they're okay with democracy maybe being replaced with other things. They don't know what that is, but examination and evidence isn't always their strong suit. But when you look at it, the things that they're advocating and believe in is what we fought the Cold War for. It's what we fought as a country for. It's what we were founded on. And so if we no longer have our values, then I think our biggest problem over the longer term, especially in this digital era, is what does the United States become if we're not united? Gerrymandering and this digital disinformation match up really, really well. We live in two countries right now. We have some districts where Republicans fight Republicans for seats, other districts where Democrats fight Democrats for seats.
Okay, just on cyber
Right,
InfoWars.
right, but
we're going to open a whole nother can of worms here.
Please let me finish this. This is important. They look in cyber not about hacks, but in terms of influence and information. It is one bubble. People together, and they all share and use the same information sources. Hacking is for novices. Influence is for masters. And the Russians have mastered that in the information space. And anyone with enough resources can master it as well. It was a two-part failure of our government going into this election. We didn't understand that hacking powered influence. That was what they were doing the hacking for. And we never thought it would happen to us. And it had happened all across Europe. So I think, I know that we're trying to segregate this out as cyber, but there is no difference when 80% of your news comes off of social media feeds anymore. We are in a bubble, two bubbles.
We're going to voting machines just to hack people. What do you mean, Molly, when you said that?
It's sort of a good transition into this, but it's exactly what Debbie was saying, and that's that the weak link is people in any of these systems. And when you're thinking about sort of the hard security side, cyber and hacking and leaks is kind of one separate issue. But when you're talking about information, that's a very different space. And that's not really something you can cyber secure or find a great firewall for. And I think in this last election, suddenly there was attention to the ways that information moves and finds a life of its own, no matter where it is generated from, and that information is a tremendous tool for chaos, which is very much the goal of the Kremlin when looking at its policy towards the United States, but the West writ large. And when you have information as a tremendous tool for chaos moving across social media, which is an accelerated means for moving information like none of us have ever seen before, giving information really a viral speed in terms of what it can do. And when you have information on social media backed by incredibly powerful data sets that are sculpted in very specific ways using new psychometric targeting, and then you have campaigns coming out, like the Trump campaign, and bragging about how they have almost individually targeted content toward people. Whether or not they actually did that, different story. But it is possible to sculpt these different landscapes of information. And I think the way you heard the Trump campaign talking about it after the election, they very much said there were 3 different groups of Americans that we were targeting heavily to keep them from voting. Black people, young women, other women. There was another group, I can't remember. But they said it very specifically. They were running voter suppression campaigns to keep groups of people from voting that they believed were not going to be helpful to their ultimate voting outcome. And it's the technology they're using is not something specific to them. It's developed by private sector companies. It's for sale. Anybody can buy it. When I'm in the Baltics, when I'm in countries that are looking for different technology tools to monitor, track, and fight Russian information warfare, most of what they're using is stuff they bought from guys, Canadians, American engineers, whatever. And I'm fine with the Lithuanian information ops guys having that. I want them to have that. I'm fine with the Estonians having it. Not fine with the Russians having it. I'm not fine with some guys sitting somewhere who bought it off the shelf having it. And I think we're really behind on understanding the power that social media and algorithmic challenges have given to the spread of information in new ways and how that affects us. The core of what a lot of this is just marketing. There's no special sauce. You'll hear all these data companies talking about their magical, algorithms or whatever. It's basically very simple psychology, marketing techniques. But convincing you of an idea is not that much harder than convincing you want a pair of shoes. And we're really far behind on understanding that. And if you look at what was happening so when you saw, and I'm sorry for the long answer, but Comey's sort of infamous spring testimony this year, which I'm sure many of you sort of saw news on, and he mentioned the beginning of summer 2015 as sort of an uptick in this period of time when you saw Russian information operations accelerating in sort of the US information space. Now, what happened in the beginning of summer 2015? There was this bizarre chemical factory hoax that the Russians sort of put on social media about, I think it was Alabama, but some random chemical factory in the South. They put out this story. There was some leak. There was some terrible thing that was going to happen. But it was a test to see how you can mobilize people, how you can create fear and panic. So it's not just information. It's not just convincing you about a thing. It's to provoke specific response. And if you look at that as sort of the starting point of a longer landscape, coming up through the election in the United States, as the beginning of a point of public opinion. You had, in that time period, just on 3 key issues, the Republican base shifted 35 points on their views on free trade, 20 points on their views of Vladimir Putin, and about 30 points on their views of the ability of the media to act as a restraint on political leaders. And in the same time period, no shift in Democrats. So if you have 3 issues that basically say more isolated America, more in favor of Russia, with more leaning toward authoritarian tendencies in leaders, on which there was a 20 to 40 point shift in US public opinion within a specific political party in a specific period of time, when people try to come out and say, yeah, the Russians did stuff during the elections with information, and it happened to parallel all the stuff that some of the Trump campaign people were doing, but it had no impact on the outcome of the vote, that's absolutely a false proposition. And I think that's where, when you're on the Hill talking to people, if you're talking to the Senate, to the Congress, there's still this hang-up where there's like cyber and other, and this other thing that no one wants to look at. And even if we cannot prove that our election infrastructure was not physically hacked, which I think we don't really know because no one wants to look at it, this hacking of the information space, which is about influencing how people think, happened. And we know it happened. Guys like Clint have documented it really well. And we have yet to discuss this in an articulate way, figure out what the response needs to be, or tell Americans in a clear sense this whole no star chamber idea. There's people like me and Clint and like the private sector where they want to contribute, trying to find solutions to this, but we're not your government. And we need our government talking to you clearly about this, the same way some of the Baltic governments and others do. But we don't have a strategic center to this effort yet, and we're leaving our population vulnerable to attack by a foreign adversary.